I gotta say, every time that A24 logo pops up at the beginning of a trailer, my mind instantly is a little more attracted to the film in hand. Between A Ghost Story and It Comes at Night, I gotta say that's definitely continuing in 2017. Whether or not Free Fire lives up to that standard, that remains to be seen, but we'll get there. Welcome to the Cricket Table Podcast. This is Rob. On this episode, we're going to be reviewing director Ben Wheatley's new action comedy, Free Fire. This film is the latest release from independent distributor A24. For those of you unaware, A24 is basically the company behind just about every intriguing, startlingly different, low-budget film that you've heard of since its inception in 2013 and its first release, A Glimpse Inside the Mind of Charles Swan III. In fact, in both 2015 and 2016, there's been at least one A24 film that made my top 10 films of those years, with Room and Moonlight, for example. And you can find the links to my top 10 of those years in the show notes below. So before we delve into Free Fire, with our usual review format, we'll take a look at the most original A24 releases to date, with a little segment I like to call, Let's Talk About Six. Let's talk about six, baby. Let's talk about flicks and me. Let's talk about what the good films and the bad films are to me. Let's talk about six. Let's talk about six. So first, let's establish some ground rules. This isn't some anarchic society we're running at the Cricket Table Podcast. In order to qualify for this ranking of the most original A24 films, I had to have seen the films in question. So if I'm missing your favorite A24 film, please forgive me. I still have some catching up to do. I haven't seen them all yet. If you look at their filmography, it's actually pretty extensive considering they've only been around a few years. The number of films that they've come out with are definitely in the dozens, and that's quite an output for such a young production house. But anyway, the ranking here doesn't necessarily reflect the order in which I appreciate the films. Actually, some of my favorite ones did not make this list, just because we're listing them not by how much I love them or whether which are my favorites, that kind of thing. I'm listing them based on how visionary or how distinctive they are from the usual cinematic experience. What I really like about A24, as I've established already in this first couple minutes of this episode, is that they have a really keen eye for putting films out there that are very different and sort of outside the box in their approach to certain genres, in the tone or the atmosphere that they portray, in looking at themes and stories from completely different angles than a lot of cinema that has predated it, sort of delivering something fresh. And in this world of sequels and reboots and spin-offs, and I mean, we just talked about The Fate of the Furious on last week's episode, A24, for better or worse, consistently delivers original properties and tries to put something new and different into the cinematic experience, whereas the rest of we've fallen into the franchise fatigue at this point. So whenever anything comes out that looks at stories and characters in a completely different way, that's always something that's interesting to me. So moving into number 6, Ex Machina. This is the film from director Alex Garland, stars Oscar Isaac, Domhnall Gleeson, and Alicia Vikander. Actually won Oscar for best visual effects, which is pretty impressive considering how minimalist those were. And the visual effects were very subtle in getting Alicia Vikander to play this android who may or may not have ulterior motives, and sort of the dynamic between those three characters that evolves over the course of the film. This was actually, I think, my third or fourth favorite movie of 2015, just because it did take those themes of technology and what it means to be human that we've seen address time and time again from pretty much any sci-fi movie. I mean, from Terminator to The Matrix to all this stuff. This film basically just has three characters in a single setting, and it's sort of a psychological chess game going on between the three of them, of trying to figure out what each of them is motivated by and what their objectives are, and the way that plays out the way that it's really a psychological thriller / character study, sort of masquerading as a sci-fi movie, was really interesting to me. And I know Alex Garland has a new film coming out, I believe, later this year called Annihilation, and I'm definitely looking forward to checking that out, because if Ex Machina is any indication of what he can do, we have some really good, interesting content ahead. Moving into number 5. This is Enemy from Denis Villeneuve, and that is, of course, the guy who did Arrival, and the director and the filmmaker who's coming back to do Blade Runner, as well as Sicario, and then now is doing the second one. I don't know if he's directing that. I forgot. I forget who. I think he's just producing that, but still, the man from Sicario and Prisoners, Arrival, and all that, who's now become basically pegged as the next Christopher Nolan. But Enemy sees Jake Gyllenhaal, who also appeared in Prisoners for Denis Villeneuve, playing dual roles as this man who's realizes he's watching an old film and he sees a doppelganger of someone who looks exactly like him, which is what a doppelganger is, I guess, and tracks him down to try and figure out what, if they're related or what the deal is there. And I don't want to get into spoilers for this film, but it's probably one of the most, not convoluted, but most abstract in some ways, psychological, again, this is a psychological thriller, I guess, thrillers in recent memory. I've seen entire videos on YouTube. Chris Stuckman did a really good one, breaking down what the symbolism of the film is and exactly what's going on, because it is one of those films that when you watch it, you aren't exactly sure what the hell you're seeing. I mean, there's this whole thing with this giant spider that they cut to a few times throughout the film, and in very pivotal moments. I'm trying not to give anything away for those of you who have not seen it, and that's probably a lot of you, considering it wasn't exactly a box office smash. But I would definitely check it out. Upon my initial viewing, I wasn't even sure if I liked the film. It's one of those that's that you have to kind of sit on and watch it, let it simmer for a little bit, and then go online and read a bunch of articles being like, wait, what the hell did I just see? What does that mean? And then you can start to appreciate the artistry and style that's gone into Villeneuve's filmmaking, as well as Gyllenhaal's really layered performance. And this came out, I believe, around the same time, maybe the same year as Nightcrawler, or the year before. And Gyllenhaal's done some stellar work in recent years. And it's ridiculous to me that he hasn't gotten an Oscar nomination that he didn't get one for Nightcrawler, he didn't get one for this, because he's been delivering constantly good performances. Same thing from Villeneuve. And if you're a fan of either of them, maybe seen some of their other films, especially Villeneuve's, who's now, like I said, breaking into the mainstream, I'd definitely go back and check this out. Number 4, we're looking at The Witch. I think we had an episode of the podcast early last year where Freddie came on and broke down how disappointed he was by this, talking about that it wasn't scary at all, that it was really boring. And my experience was totally different. I don't know if I talked about that on here. I believe I did talk about it on here somewhere. Yeah, and it may have made my top. It made my top 10 of 2016. So I have to revise my top 10 of 2016 a little bit, so we'll see if it stays on there or gets pushed to honorable mention by the time you're listening to this episode. But The Witch is definitely not for quote-unquote horror fans who are really in it for jump scares and gore and that kind of thing. This is a period piece set in the 1600s or so, and it's like a Puritan family who gets cast out of their village and trying to start a new life, basically, on their own. And their infant child goes missing. I won't get into spoilers. And it delves into a lot of religious themes and kind of grappling with morality versus religion, and society's putting pressure on your virtue and that kind of thing. And does so in a really interesting way that's really capturing the period setting here. The dialogue is all very accented and very much tailored to the vibe that they're trying to create with recreating that Puritan age and what people really talked like back then. And the film also gives us, not only is it a directorial debut by Robert Eggers. It also was sort of the breakthrough performance for Anya Taylor-Joy, who's since been in Split and a bunch of other things. And I found the film really effective and really haunting. In fact, it still sticks with me. And if you haven't seen it, I would definitely give it a chance. Don't be turned off by the haters that have been saying that it's not scary. It's such a slog to watch. Blah blah blah. Because if you go into it expecting, I don't know, The Conjuring or something, or Nightmare on Elm Street or something, Halloween, like basically a standard, like put it on a Friday night and make a bunch of popcorn and jump scares, like I said, you will be disappointed. But if you go into it expecting a period set psychological thriller, I said psychological a few times, but it really does play on a lot of the themes that were prevalent in the minds of the people of that era. And in that way, it feels like a time capsule of a different age. Whether or not there are supernatural elements at play, I'm going to let you watch the film and check out. But definitely worth watching, and probably one of the most different horror films I've seen in recent years. Moving into number 3. This is sort of a horror film, thriller, drama. It's hard to categorize, other than sci-fi, I guess. Under the Skin. And this one features Scarlett Johansson as an alien being. Well, I mean, it's an alien being in Scarlett Johansson's body. And this is from director Jonathan Glazer. The film is done in such a minimalist way that there's actually very, very few actors in it other than Scarlett Johansson. Most of the characters, in fact, are played by non-actors, and it's Scarlett Johansson was, filmed interacting with them with hidden cameras, sort of remaining in character the whole time, and it's just kind of her wandering around and interacting with different men and luring them back to her hideaway so that she can devour them, something. The film itself is very, very abstract and very not hard to follow, because the plot is just kind of a series of encounters with this creature, and it doesn't really spell very much out, but there's a lot of subtext that you can read into it, as far as the way the female body is viewed, or objectification, and all kind. There's a lot of themes, and this is another one, sort of like Enemy, in that you're gonna want to watch it and then go and read articles written about what it has to say about gender, what it has to say, gender identity, what it has to say about feminism, or the role of women and rape culture and all that. There's a lot of stuff going on within this film that isn't really on the surface. Again, this is another one, like I said up at the top, this is not a list ranking my favorite A24 films. In fact, like Enemy, I was sort of on the fence of like, did I even enjoy this? Was this a film that I would, quote, recommend? And I'm not sure if Under the Skin really worked for me, but regardless, it's hard to deny the fact that it is shockingly different than any other film on Scarlett Johansson's resume. I mean, this is the same person that plays Black Widow every other year, and here she's really taking a creative risk. And the film, the way its depiction of an alien species, of what that alien is up to, and the music, the score by Mika Levy, who did the score for Jackie, was nominated last year for that, is really creepy, and I will defend the score, if not the film itself. It's an interesting experience. Again, not most of these are original, can be translated into really kind of weird and out there. So this is not the kind you want to like, oh, it's a sci-fi movie, but Scarlett Johansson plays an alien, blah, blah, blah. It's like, this is not Lucy or Ghost in the Shell or any of these like Angelina Jolie, Scarlett Johansson, Charlize Theron sci-fi thrillers. This is not that kind of movie at all. But if you're looking for something a little different, a little experimental, Under the Skin is probably a safe bet. Moving into number 2, The Lobster. Now, this one is a really different one. This is from Yorgos Lanthimos, is a Greek director who's probably best known for the film Dogtooth, which I saw a few years ago based on a recommendation from a friend. And that was an interesting film, but I think The Lobster takes his sort of bizarre whimsy to a whole nother level. This one has Colin Farrell as this man who is basically in the society where single people have 45 days to find a mate, or they turn into an animal of their choice. And if that premise in and of itself sounds ridiculous, then you're right on track for what the Lobster's trying to get across, because the film basically uses that kind of ridiculous setup as a satirical allegory for the pressures of relationships, and how, you know, society puts this time limit on, oh, you need to meet a man or a woman and settle down and raise a family and blah 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 blah. And I think that a lot of people, you know, in my age group, 20s and 30s, are really, they might appreciate this the most because they're kind of in the midst of that. But I mean, it really kind of takes that premise and rings it for all it's worth. It takes a pretty drastic shift halfway through the film and becomes something a little bit different, a little deeper in some ways. But the first half for me was where a lot of the black comedy really stuck out. I don't know what that is. Really stuck out and was really kind of fun. If you like that kind of tongue-in-cheek humor. I will also probably caution that the movie does go really dark in some places. So if you're expecting, you know, your traditional comedy, you'll probably be turned off by this one. But there's a lot of interesting points that this movie does make that that you might, if you are a certain kind of viewer, really relate to and recognize kind of the, in some ways, genius of what this film is trying to accomplish. Of course, it was nominated for Best Original Screenplay at the Oscars last year, which it lost. But it's heartening to see films like this being recognized by the Academy, because it really does take a lot of chances, and it's pretty much as far from a traditional romantic comedy as you're likely to find, and really standout supporting performance by Rachel Weisz as well. So moving into number one, the most original A24 film, at least of the ones that I've seen, and I'd like to think I've seen some of the strangest ones. It's got to be Swiss Army Man. Those of you who have seen this film would probably have to agree that the Daniel Radcliffe farting corpse movie, as this was known during the festival circuit, is just about as batshit crazy as a movie as I've ever seen. And yet somehow it works. This was actually, of this list of 6, this is one of the other ones that I actually did enjoy quite a bit. It didn't quite make my top 10 last year, but it was easily probably top 20 or so. This film stars Paul Dano as a man stranded on an island who's about to hang himself to commit suicide, and a body washes up on shore. So of course he runs over to the body to see what's going on, to see if they can help the guy, blah blah blah. And it turns out to be a corpse who's alive and farts, and he uses it as a jet ski. Literally, that's the first 5 minutes of the movie, not spoiling anything. So he goes on to use this corpse as a tool to survive, hence the Swiss Army Man. And the film delves into so many. It's like both strange and insightful and creepy and beautiful all at the same time. And I don't even know how that's possible. There are some things that happen in the second half where when you find out exactly what is happening or what's going on, the film has some pretty profound points to make about loneliness and about love and about belonging and again really delving into its lead character's head. Incredible performance by Daniel Radcliffe. I personally would have nominated him for something for Best Supporting Actor for this, because it's not easy to play a dead guy who has to emote as much as possible but still keep his face still and still, deadpan it enough. I don't know if deadpan is the right word. Well, pun intended for deadpan, at least. Like, express himself and emote, but without moving many of his face muscles because he's supposed to be a dead body. So he really commits to that performance and gives a beautifully physical performance. Paul Dano here, who's done some incredible work in the past. I'm thinking specifically of Love and Mercy, where he played young Brian Wilson. He was so great in that film. He was also in Prisoners, the Denis Villeneuve movie, talking about him earlier. But Swiss Army Man is just such a strange, weird movie, and one that really kind of charmed me by the end with everything that it had to say, and the way that it's ending is just like, yeah, fuck you people, fuck you. We're just going all out there. And this is from two filmmakers, Daniel Scheinert and Daniel Kwan, who call themselves Daniels. And this is their first film, so I'm really excited to see what they have coming up next, just because this film is so different. Like, I can't even... some of the other ones on this top 6 most original A24 films, yeah, I've seen stuff sort of like Ex Machina, sort of like Enemy, sort of like, not like The Lobster, but taking a similar allegorical spin on a, modern social norm. And Swiss Army Man, I can't think of anything that comes, that I've seen. Maybe some of you send me a tweet at Crooked Table if you can think of something. Well, Swiss Army Man's totally like this movie from the 80s or something. Let me know. I actually drove out of my way to go and find this at a theater because I'd heard so much about it, and I had to see it for myself. And if you are at all interested in pushing in filmmakers that push the limits of what cinema can do and really take it to really bizarre, twisted, but also kind of moving in a way places, then I would definitely check out Swiss Army Man. Highly recommend it for at least to check it out. I'm not saying that you're gonna like it or not, because it's probably one of the most divisive films I've ever seen, with good reason, because it is really strange. But those of you that see it, you're either going to love it or you're either going to hate it. I think it's pretty much one extreme or the other, because the film itself is so extreme in its tone, in its attitude, in how vigorously it pursues the point that it's trying to get at and what it's trying to say. So highly recommended. That's our number one for most original A24 films, Swiss Army Man. Some of the honorable mentions that I did, films that I have seen by A24 that I considered for this list: Room, which I really love, which was on my top 10 of 2015. Great performance from Brie Larson in that. We'll get to Brie Larson later in a few minutes when we talk about Free Fire. Moonlight, which I've already talked about. You can listen to the episode where I discuss Moonlight in incredible depth in the show notes, the link to that podcast episode from back in the day. And also Locke with Tom Hardy, basically an hour and a half of Tom Hardy driving a car and talking on the phone, and yet somehow it's compelling. I don't know if that is a testament to Tom Hardy's acting ability, to how tight the script is, probably a combination of the two, but those were some of the honorable mentions that probably if it was Let's Talk About 9, those probably would have been the other ones that would have snuck onto the list. So that brings us to our feature presentation, our review of Free Fire.
Check out the merch.
That's not what he ordered.
Fuck, really?
We ordered M16s, different weapon.
I'm not running a fucking pizza delivery service.
Keep your shit together.
You want the weapons or you don't want the weapons?
So if you're just joining us and haven't listened to the last 5 or 6 episodes, let me tell you a little bit about the format, the way we've been doing our feature presentation reviews. We're going to discuss the hype, the story, the cast, the production, and then finally the verdict. So moving into the hype. This is the latest film from director Ben Wheatley. It was executive produced by Martin Scorsese, among others, and it features an ensemble cast. Basically, this was sold as a satire and social commentary about gun violence, exploring it through essentially a feature-length shootout. I haven't seen any of Wheatley's films to date, but I heard pretty interesting things about High Rise, and of course with A24's seal of intrigue on it and such a charismatic cast, not to mention that pretty fun trailer that you heard just a moment ago. Free Fire appeared to be a stylish bit of tongue-in-cheek action that could prove to be a good time. taking a fairly fresh approach to storytelling, much like Hardcore Henry, which also starred Sharlto Copley, and putting a new spin on action movie mechanics. So the question is, does it live up to the A24 standard, and is it fun to watch? Let's move into the story. Unfortunately, like Hardcore Henry, you can see my review in the show notes for that, Free Fire is a great idea that essentially proves why most stories just don't use this device very often. And we're going to go into spoilers here, such as there are any. Screenwriters Wheatley and Amy Jump put together an action comedy here set in 1970s Boston, though the city doesn't really have anything to do with it, but apparently it is set in Boston, about an arms deal gone wrong, and it all takes place in this one location in an abandoned factory. And it's basically, the first half hour or so is really devoted to introducing you to the characters, their dynamics, their loyalties or lack thereof, what side they're on, what they're in it for, that kind of thing. And generally giving a sense of who they are. So, in my opinion, this was the film's first mistake, because none of these characters are really interesting enough to me that you need 30 minutes of an 85-minute movie to establish who they are. Moreover, the film doesn't really even ask you to care about them very much anyway. Plot-wise, there's not a whole lot going on here. The whole gunfight basically starts off. The trailer would have you believe that it's because of the arms deal and they brought the wrong weapons, that kind of thing. That does happen, obviously. But it really starts off because there's apparently a sexual predator in the group who assaulted the cousin of someone from the opposite side. And all of that is actually pretty serious thematically, to the point that to me it didn't really fit in with the tone of what they're going for with the movie. Granted, it's supposed to be a black comedy, but taking like an arms deal gone wrong and making it sort of Looney Tunes-esque in that they're just shooting people everywhere and it's like almost Acme bullets being fired on both sides. That to me would have been a lot more interesting than bringing this weird darker element into it that kind of takes away from everything else going on for me. Free Fire really does try to have its metaphorical cake and eat it too, in that the film doesn't really take any of the mayhem seriously, but yet it still features an operatic moment when the shooting starts, as if something tragic has just occurred. And we're supposed to be like holding our breath like, oh no, what has just happened? These people, something horrible has gone wrong. It's like, no, we're not supposed to give a shit about any of these people or anything that's happening to them. They're all basically sort of terrible people. We're supposed to just roll with it. It's supposed to be a fun thrill ride type thing. So the fact that they had this whole moment when the initial shot that kicks off the main rest of the film, when that happens, making it such a pivotal moment the way that they did in the film, it was a weird decision to me for the movie to do that, especially since it purports itself to sort of be a satire of on-screen gun violence. We'll get to that in a little bit. Moving into the cast, so probably the biggest thing Free Fire has going for it is the actors that they've gotten together for this. Sharlto Copley, Armie Hammer, Brie Larson, Cillian Murphy, Jack Reynor, and a host of others really make the most of the material here. As I've mentioned, there's still not a whole lot of depth to the characters, even with the 30 minutes of build-up. As the no-nonsense American businesswoman amidst a group of trigger-happy men, Larson, who of course earned an Oscar for A24's Room, which I mentioned earlier, and is set to debut as Captain Marvel at some point in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, she really wrings every bit of personality she can out of the character. You can even hear in that clip that I played from the trailer that she really commits to it and easily emerges as a standout. I've been a fan of her since Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, and pretty much everything she's been in, she really does tend to change. She's really good at taking on different personalities and making you sort of do a double take. Wait, that was the same person? She very much is very. She's proven in film after film how versatile she is. Same here goes for Hammer and Reynor. They brought a lot of flair to the roles that they had here. I previously enjoyed both of them in films like The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and My Beloved Sing Street, respectively. And both of them have such a keen understanding of the film that the kind of film that they're in, and they really give it their all. Some of the best moments actually come from Reynor and Armie Hammer. Those one-liners that come out of there, and Hammer has actually consistently been in major films for years, but he has yet to really become a household name. Hopefully he'll land eventually a superhero role, because apparently in the industry these days that's what you need to make him a major star. Or an Oscar, in the case of Brie Larson. She got the Oscar, and now she's got the superhero role. But Armie Hammer was supposed to play Batman back in the day. He's supposedly been up for a bunch of different ones. I could totally see him as Green Lantern in the DCEU at some point, but that's neither here nor there. However, Armie Hammer and Brie Larson and Jack Reynor were all great, as well as Cillian Murphy. Can't leave him out of there. He's pretty much great in anything, so it sort of goes without saying. He's been around and been doing such great work forever. But to me, the standout was really Sharlto Copley. After breaking through in films like District 9, he continues to bring such a wacky and inherently likable presence to films like Elysium and Hardcore Henry, which I mentioned already, and which you can see see my video review in the show notes for that. Neither of which, Elysium and Hardcore Henry, neither of which I really liked, but he was the best thing about both of those films. And for me, without this cast, Free Fire would probably be a pretty forgettable experience. As far as the production, so having never seen one of Wheatley's films, I was immediately taken by the sense of style he brings to the screen. Right from the main titles, you can get a feel that there is a distinct vision at play here. And that really goes back to what I was saying about A24 and how they are very much a filmmaker-driven production house that really believes in creating something different and something new and something fresh and not something 100% derivative. And if there's anything I could say about Free Fire, that definitely is the case here. This does not feel like other action movies, even though it is sort of supposed to be an homage to these kinds of films and these kinds of tones of films from the 70s and 80s. Hence, the period setting sort of plays into that a little bit. It does create something different and something that has a very singular vibe to it. The gunfights here, of course, are all well shot and edited. Wheatley is clearly a competent director. It's just a little irritating to me in the film how much cross-cutting goes on as far as we check on in the various people in the factory. I mean, you have the 5 or 6 main cast members, and then you have at least that many supporting characters that you're constantly jumping back and forth to see what everybody's doing and how much they're bleeding and where they got shot and blah, blah, blah. And to me, I think that perhaps the action would have been better with fewer characters. Kind of trim that in half, because a lot of the other side people that are not the main actors that I've mentioned, a lot of them, not all of them, mind you, there's 2 or 3 that are pretty fun to watch, are egregiously undeveloped and kind of don't need to be there. I feel like with fewer players, that might have left more room for the tension to build and for the action to remain a lot more coherent throughout. Still, there's little to complain about production-wise. The small scale of the film, the fact that it's all in one setting, I think lends it a nice gritty claustrophobia that works to its advantage. I just wish the film itself was more consistently engaging, though there are, of course, fun moments and fun character beats here and there that provide a nice, break from the tension as much as there is tension in this. Because as I said, you don't really have particular connection to very many of these characters, so if they get shot or they die or whatever, you're just like, there's other people, it moves along. And I think that's kind of the point. Moving into the verdict, this was sort of a shorter review just because there's not as much to talk about as in a Logan or a Moonlight or even a Fate of the Furious, just because that has 7 films of baggage to break down. So Free Fire, as far as the movie itself as a whole, those looking for a lot of shooting should enjoy all the gunfights, or the gunfight as it is, because it really is basically an hour-long gunfight after the 20 to 30 minutes of establishing who these people are and what's happening. After all, the film itself is pretty casual with how liberally the bullets spray throughout. But personally, I found myself losing interest in films with too much action or where the action doesn't feel personalized, even in films I like. I talked about this a little bit last episode with the Fate of the Furious. Some of the submarine sequence towards the end, there's just so much going on. You don't even know what's happening or care. And since I didn't care about these characters, I didn't really have any emotional stakes in what was happening. Granted, you're not supposed to have emotional stakes, but you're supposed to at least have enough fun or be engaged enough to be invested in what's going on screen, basically. So despite its apparent satirical edge, and again, to me that didn't really seem to be there, Free Fire doesn't really have anything to say. It doesn't have much to say as far as a satire. So, or if it did, it was very obtuse. Nor does it find enough juice, really, to keep the story, in quotes, interesting all the way through. There isn't much of a story here. There's basically the premise that you hear in the trailer, and then something goes wrong, there's a misunderstanding, and then all shooting happens and all hell breaks loose, and there's snipers, and the question is, who who's behind it and who's going to get out alive. There's some fun comedic bits that are threaded in there, especially a lot of them on Sharlto Copley's end. There's this whole running gag with his suit and how he keeps getting shot, and he's upset about that, and he makes cardboard armor to protect infection. You can hear that in the trailer. A lot of the best character moments, Armie Hammer being and some of his one-liners about masturbation or about just his like digs at people. Some of them are in the trailers, and some of them are they're sprinkled throughout the movie. Some of the really great lines, but there wasn't enough to propel the movie forward or for the film to really rely on and hook me in as a viewer. Again, film in all art is subjective. So some of you listening to this podcast might love this movie and it might be your favorite movie of the year. For me, in the end, there's only so much shooting that I can take before it just becomes boring and repetitive. It had about halfway, actually, an hour into the film, so halfway through the big shootout portion of the film, it just started to all blur together, and I was just wondering how much more was left. Looking at my watch, I was like, is this? Yeah, okay. Crap, we have another half hour. All right. So that 85 minutes felt way longer to me. I mean, this easily felt like a 2-hour movie just because it was drawn out for an 85-minute film. It was really... an extended shootout sounds like it would be fun, but sit there and watch an hour of people shooting and it becomes kind of numbing. And it could be that was Ben Wheatley's point, was to, show how casual and desensitized viewers have gotten with gun violence, both in the news and on screen and all of that, and sort of comment on that issue and kind of shed some light on it, not necessarily making a statement one way or another, but just kind of bringing that to light and be like, oh, you like gun violence, okay, here you go. And then after a while you're just like, whoa, I don't like gun violence anymore, shut it off, end the film, hit the credits. And in that case, I guess it worked, if that was the intention, because for me, I'm going 2.5 out of 5 on this one. Even with my problems, with the problems I have with the film, Free Fire does neatly fit within the parameters of the risky creative moves that A24 is known for. It does, as I mentioned earlier, it does bring a very distinct vision, and it's got that hook of essentially a feature-length shootout. So it is worth checking out if you just want to see what that production house is up to. Though for me, out of the A24 filmography to date, this is one that I'm probably pretty unlikely to revisit. So that concludes our review of Free Fire, the latest film from A24. Just to give you a little heads up, next week on the Crooked Table Podcast, we're going to be talking about Dear White People. Both the 2014 film by writer-director Justin Cillian, as well as the upcoming Netflix series created by the filmmaker. It's sort of a review, but it's also sort of an examination of the controversy surrounding the Netflix show and that trailer, and how some people lost their minds calling it racist, which leads me to believe, do they even know much about this property, or are they just looking for something to get upset about? This is, after all, a society where people are freaking out over Starbucks cups, so on a regular basis. But we'll delve into that next week. If you want to reach out to me directly, Robert Yanis Jr., you can find me on Twitter at Crooked Table. Crooked Table is also on Facebook and Tumblr, and I'm on Instagram, so if you want to see what I have to do there, send me an email at robert@crookedtable.com. Rate and review the show on iTunes. Also, we are now on Stitcher, so if you're big into listening to podcasts that way, go and search for Crooked Table Podcast on Stitcher. The link is also in the show notes below for that. And let me know what you thought of this episode. Let me know what you thought of Free Fire. Did the film work for you? Am I on my own here in saying that it was less than effective? I know it's gotten sort of a mixed response from critics. I've seen some people on film Twitter, as they call it, really say what a great time it was, and others kind of denounce it as pretty disappointing. And as you can tell from my review, I'm a little bit on the latter end. But, I want to hear what you guys have to say. Maybe you can convince me and get me to see this film in a new light. Until next time, I'm Rob, and this is the Crooked Table Podcast. I'll catch you guys next week. Roll credits.
This has been a production of crookedtable.com. All rights reserved.
CR-O-O-K-E-D.